Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley, joined by Greg Barnes and Jason Staples. That means it is the Game Plan podcast, is the last Game Plan podcast of the year, of the season. Of course, January 2nd, Carolina in the Orange Bowl at 8 a.m., 8 p.m. against Texas A&M. Before we get started, let me ask you to rate us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube. It makes a difference for us. It helps us out. It helps us get better content, more content to you. And if you have a suggestion or whatever, send it to us. We'd like to give the listeners whatever they want within reason when we do these podcasts. If I've got Jason and Greg, that means
within reason.
When I have Jason and Greg, that means I have the game plan. And so, Greg, I'll come to you first. A couple days out from this ball game, earlier in the week, and we talked about it on the Beat podcast as well, but I think it bears repeating. Early in the week, Javonte's announcement seemed to have Mack Brown scrambling a little bit. You wrote the article on Monday on Inside Carolina. It's one of those things where it's not unexpected that he opted out, but the timing is, I guess, frustrating for the coaching staff.
Right. I think the biggest thing coming out of this is that Mack Brown has been around long enough that he understands, down the road, this will pay dividends in recruiting in terms of being like, look, we did everything we could for these guys. We're telling them thanks for a great year. They helped get us to the Orange Bowl. They're going to do what's best for them. And as he pointed out pretty strongly on Monday, look, every single one of us, whether it be reporters or fans or coaches or players, you got to do what's best for you and what's best for your family. And so, as he said, there's a potential for UNC to lose an assistant coach after the season. Happens every year. Not that he's expecting one. But when coaches leave after the season, people don't get so worked up about it. It's just part of the business. Well, this is kind of the same thing. I think the issue, however, is once North Carolina came back to campus, they had the week off after the Miami game. They were able to go home. They came back, were tested. And they told the guys, look, if you have a decision to make in terms of playing in the bowl game, deciding to go pro early, whatever it may be, let us know before we start bowl practice, just so we know what we're working with as we prepare for Texas A&M. And so Mack Brown, Chad Surratt, Michael Carter all did that. And Javonte Williams had not made a decision at that point. So what happens is all of last week, while North Carolina is beginning preparation for A&M, they're operating under the assumption that Javonte Williams all of a sudden is going to be the feature back for them for at least one game without Michael Carter being available. And so they go through that week of practice, and they didn't have practice scheduled on Saturday around lunchtime while they're getting ready to set up for their staff meeting. Javonte comes in and says, hey, after talking it over with my family, I've decided that I'm going to skip out on the bowl game and go and enter the draft. And it really mixed up their practice schedule plans because they needed an extra day to say, okay, well, what do we have to work with? Because DJ Jones hurt his foot in December. He's out for the bowl game. He was the fourth leading rusher on the team behind Williams, Carter, and Sam Howell. And then you've got the situation where one of the other freshman backs was in it was Elijah Green, who worked in a running offense in high school. And so he's not up to par yet with what they want out of pass protection. So he's likely not going to see a lot of playing time because of pass protection issues. So you're really down to Josh Henderson and then British Brooks, who's the walk-on from Ashbrook, Gastonia representing. And that's really what you're left with. And then you add in the fact that British Brooks is the special teams captain. Josh Henderson plays a lot of snaps on special teams. So you're having to balance special teams concerns. So just Javonte making the decision a week late really kind of throws all this game plan action up in the air. And North Carolina ultimately was left with 3 days to figure out a game plan for A&M without Javonte in the backfield.
Jason, I want to get into that portion, and we will, but I want to ask you your perspective. Mack did say it hurts us on Saturday. It's better for us in the long run. Getting guys drafted high in the NFL, far more important than winning a bowl game. National championship, different story. Bowl game, I would think that these four guys, what they do in April, assuming the draft's in April, has much more positive effect than anything that happens Saturday against Texas A&M. Am I right or am I wrong?
I think you're mostly right. I think bowl games do matter in terms of optics. I mean, the weird thing about bowl games is that they're aside from the playoff, especially now. I mean, bowl games have always been something of an exhibition, but it's all the more now in the playoff era that if you're not in the playoff, it's the postseason, right? It's after the season, but at the same point, it's also the last thing that you've done. Right. And then there's that's the thing about college football is that the off season is longer than the season. And so the last thing everybody remembers for months is what a team did in their bowl game. And that's one of the things that launches hype and all sorts of things. Every off season, you're going to see teams get overranked and overrated because of what they did in the prior bowl. Because that's the last taste that everybody had in their mouth. So bowl games are not unimportant for that reason because they build the buzz for your program. But when it comes to recruiting and being able to pitch to a young man and his parents in a living room and say, hey, you ought to come to you ought to really closely consider coming to our university. Not only are we one of the top public institutions in the country, really in the world, but and not only do we have a great living environment and a wonderful campus and all these other things, but we put guys into the pros consistently at your position. Look, here's the last couple of guys that does go a long way in recruiting. When you say you're going to be ready for a career in something other than sports, and we're going to give you the best possible shot to have a career in sports. So, yeah, that's more important, I think. But I think what Mack was referring to is less about Javonte getting drafted and drafted highly versus the bowl, and more about, well, it's harder for us on Saturday because obviously we'd be better with him, right? With full strength, North Carolina's a lot better football team than they are without the guys that have opted out. But guess what? Next year, those guys aren't going to be there. And so now they get a chance to play against a really good football team without those guys, with the guys that are going to have to play in those spots next year. Guys that haven't played a whole lot. I mean, you think about the guys that have opted out. Chaz Surratt, how much of those linebackers been on the field? How much of Surratt and Gemmel, those guys have been on the field 95% of the snaps in this season. So now you're going to have to replace him next year with a guy who hasn't played that much. Well, now he's going to have one solid game of starting experience under his belt against a really good team. Same thing with Carter and Williams. They had a historic season for a duo in the backfield. Well, the thing about that is when you have two guys that have that kind of season, you know what that says about number 3?
He didn't play.
He didn't play much. And so, I mean, you think about it, against Miami, they set an NCAA record. I'm going to say that again. Against Miami, they set an NCAA record for rushing by a duo, by two running backs, by two teammates. But how many rushing yards did the number 3 back have?
Crickets. A few.
Yeah, just a few, but not many. And that's partly because those guys played the whole game. And so now you get a chance to see what the future is. You get a chance as coaches to go, okay, what do we have here? What are we planning with in the off season? And that guy gets a chance to see, okay, this is what I need to improve on. This is what I'm getting better at. And also, here's getting thrown into the fire, actually having to do those things and learning on the fly. Now that guy is he's going to be a returning starter. A couple of those guys that haven't had carries all year are going to have to play like they're splitting carries, like they're the starters against a good team. And whatever mistakes they make in the bowl game, that's going to be worse. But whatever mistakes get made in the bowl game are mistakes that aren't going to be as likely to be made next year. So I think that's what Brown's really referring to more than anything. And I think he's right about that.
Greg, you can't get the experience that these guys are going to get on Saturday any other way, right? Carolina goes into 2021 as the year that everybody's looked at. And with a full team, and I guess I'm trying to find the silver lining of this, the full team plays against Texas A&M where all those guys are gone next season. And while 2021's the year that everybody's pointing to, there's a ton of question marks that there may be fewer question marks after Saturday.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great dynamics of this matchup, because if you look at Texas A&M, it appears they're not going to have any opt-outs. And granted, part of that's because while they have a lot of talented players, nobody's really projecting as a first-day draft pick. But you also have a lot of veterans on that team and in the depth chart, a lot of senior guys. And so they're wanting to make a statement that, hey, we were left out of the playoff. We don't agree with that. We want to close the season strong. Whereas I really do think now Mack Brown, probably even before the Javonte news, is really saying, look, guys, we knew Chaz wasn't coming back. He's not playing Saturday night. Michael, Diami, Javonte, those guys are gone. You take them away from the conversation, I mean, you're really left with like Tamon Fox, and I guess Garrett Walston. And those are really about it in terms of guys that aren't going to be on the team next year. And so you're pretty much what you have on Saturday night is what you're going to be playing with next year. And so while Texas A&M is kind of closing the book on a very good team, North Carolina is setting the table for a very good run next year. And yes, I mean, tailback situation is a serious problem. And maybe they'll address that in the transfer market next year. Maybe one of these young guys will really explode in the spring. That's yet to be determined. But everything else is in place. And so this is really a springboard opportunity for North Carolina to be like, look, we know we have some very good guys not playing in this game, but we're using this as a platform to say, look, we're going to be a legitimate top 10, top 15, top 20 type team in 2021. This is what we're bringing to the table. We're only going to be better. And so that's an opportunity for them. And the way that the programs are kind of looking at this game, I think is very fascinating.
So, Jason, looking at this, and then after the break, we'll get into what Carolina needs to do to win this ball game. I sort of picture this going one of two ways, and it certainly sounds like Texas A&M is focused. I watched some of their stuff earlier in the week, and they say all the right things, and Jimbo Fisher's pissed, rightfully so, but it worked out well for North Carolina, at least to get to the Orange Bowl. But Carolina got left out Mack's last year when Mack opted out to go to Texas. Carolina got left out, and they thumped Virginia Tech. I still remember the Virginia Tech quarterback getting bent in two, almost killed, saying, yeah, they weren't the best defense we saw all year. Carolina won 42-3. And then I see, I believe, Georgia and some other SEC teams. I think Georgia played Utah one year after they didn't get a higher bowl and they lost, and some other those type things. What do you think the mindset is of a team like Texas A&M? Because, you know, Florida State's been in those positions before where they didn't get the ultimate carrot. And, you know, Jimbo Fisher. I mean, is it all talk, or are they going to be 100% focused? Because from a human being standpoint, I find it hard to believe that there's not still lingering disappointment. I guess my question is, how does it translate on the field Saturday?
Yeah, it can translate a couple different ways, and it's almost impossible to project which way it's going to work unless you know the team really well. You know, you got to know the leadership on the team. I mean, that disappointment is absolutely still going to be there. But you can channel that a couple different ways. One is that you can basically just be like, screw this, and, you know, take your ball and go home kind of attitude, like, you know, whatever. Or the alternative is that you can take that disappointment and, you know, you can take it the direction that, imagine this had happened to Michael Jordan, right? You know, and I took that very personally, right? I mean, that's, you know, anything that Jordan's going to do, I'm going to take that very personally, he says, right? That's how that's going to work. I took that very personally. Well, some teams do take it that way. And that team that got left out, that Mack Brown UNC team, took it personally. They don't want us in there because we're not this brand or we're not that brand. We're every bit as good as them. We need to go and show the world that we belong. That's one way of doing it. And some teams, that's going to be the way that they're going to process it is, you know what? Screw you all. I'm going to show you all that why we belonged. Other teams, whatever. We're going to Miami. It's nicer weather than College Station. There's some action going on in all of this. I mean, the thing about the way that COVID preparations are affecting this is that you're not spending as much time on bowl site, right? So, I mean, I think that's a factor here. I mean, normally the teams that fail to demonstrate that they belonged, those guys get to the bowl sites or whatever, and they enjoy the town. They enjoy the opportunity to, go and see the nightlife a little bit and, go to the beach and these sorts of things a little bit and get a chance to look around a little bit more than, say, the teams that are locked in. So that aspect of distraction with a disappointed team, really that part probably tips the balance a little bit this year towards a team being less likely to be affected by that. And knowing Jimbo Fisher, he's going to tend toward the I took that very personally side on pretty much everything in his life. That's just how he processes stuff. The question is whether he's going to have his team match that same level of feeling disrespected and channeling it. I'm inclined to think that this is going to be a motivated Texas A&M team, that they're not going to be walking out there just like, well, I mean, it's not a playoff, so let's just do our thing. And the reason that I'm going to default to that is because we haven't seen opt-outs. The fact that we haven't seen opt-outs tells me that, yeah, you're right, that they don't have guys projected as first-day picks and all that, but that doesn't mean that they're not, going to be drafted. That doesn't mean that they're not, that they couldn't go. And so, I look at that and I see guys that are deciding to stick around for one more game and they're going, you know what? I want to leave my mark. That's what I see with that. And so if that's the case with the senior leadership, odds are that's probably where the team's going to be. So I don't think North Carolina in any way can expect a Texas A&M team that's going to be like the Alabama team that lost to Utah, the Georgia team that you mentioned. I think those teams also, by the way, oftentimes they weren't interested excuse is just that. It's a post hoc excuse. I think sometimes those teams were left out because they weren't as good and that they had flaws, and those flaws get exposed in the bowl games, sometimes by teams that are hungry and actually have spent their time to expose those flaws. This A&M team, I think, is going to be motivated. They do have some flaws, but they're going to be motivated, and I don't think they're likely to be to go out there and fold.
Let's talk about it after the break. But first, I want to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Great sponsors of this podcast and friends of Inside Carolina. The best, 100%. They have been great friends of us. They've been great friends with Inside Carolina's premium subscribers. You get that 10% off, but you get the great customer service for free. I mean, they're just nice folks. They're alumni-owned and operated. And even though Christmas holiday is past, you still need to get your gear from Johnny T-Shirt. And they're certainly still having sales every day and still supporting the university and supporting the fan base with all the swag you can get from Johnny T-Shirt and the cold weather gear. You got to get it. Take another short break. Let national guys pay the bills. We'll be back. Game plan. Jason, Greg, and myself. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. It's the Inside Carolina Game Plan podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Jason Staples and Greg Barnes. Greg, I'll come to you. We sort of got into it just a little bit right before the break, the motivation for Texas A&M. I'm looking at their roster, and they're loaded with some seniors, and Kellen Mond and then the linebacker. But I see an interesting stat. on their sheet. It says, to date, 86% of the Aggies' rushing yards and 92% of their receiving yards comes from freshmen and sophomores. That's pretty much the exact opposite from North Carolina, and those guys will be playing. So let's talk about Jay Bateman's defense first. I said at the top, maybe off the air, I thought Chaz Surratt's absence might be bigger than anything on the offensive side. But Eugene Asante has gotten plenty of discussion over the last few days. Is he the guy in the crosshairs, you think, or is a guy like Gimmel that's played all year, it's time for him to really step up?
Well, certainly in terms of leadership, it's Gimmel. I don't think there's any question about that. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have to. They've praised Eugene Asante for over a year now, and it's one of those things where, and Bateman was even asked about it on Monday, but they've praised Asante as kind of this next in line and kind of the future at that inside linebacker position, and yet at the same time, we're seeing Chaz Surratt and Jeremiah Gimmel playing pretty much all the snaps. And Jay Bateman's answer to that is why those guys are playing so much when you need to build for the future is we just haven't felt comfortable taking those guys off the field. And so we're going to get to see it on Saturday night of how far along Asante is. And I really think, if you look at what Chaz has done so well, I thought they utilized him very well against Notre Dame and against Miami, and kind of keeping an eye on Ian Book and Derek King. And Kellen Mond is a dual threat guy. He's not as squirmy as Derek King is, but he's let's see here. He's got 258 rushing yards, 4.1 yards per carry. So when you factor in sacks, he's adequate. And so I think that's going to be the challenge is how do you defend the QB run a little bit in this game? Because Chaz Surratt kind of has a nose for the ball. And while we've talked a lot about his tackling angles maybe have not been there, it's been a work in progress, he does know how to get there and get there quick. And so I think that's going to be an area where maybe Texas A&M tries to exploit. But to be honest with you, and Jason can expand on this, but Texas A&M is stout up front on both sides of the line. And as Mack Brown emphasized on Monday, I mean, not a carbon copy of Notre Dame, but a lot of similarities. And they do have some more advanced passing scheme elements than Notre Dame did, just because they don't rely on two tight ends as much. But how North Carolina handles the line of scrimmage is going to be everything. And if they're in a situation where they can give Gimmel and Asante some room to make some plays, I think Asante can do that. It's when you've got offensive linemen getting to the second level, that's when things get very challenging for a kid who hasn't played many snaps on this type of stage.
Jason, is it Asante that's got to play the game of his life or somebody else? And I agree with Greg that the trenches in this one are going to decide the game, period. But for Carolina's defense to limit what Mond and Spiller and their passing attack wants to do, who's the guy?
I think it's got to be the defensive tackles first and foremost. They have to be able to match up on the inside. And, Mack Brown already said it. Greg said it. When I look at this team, when I scout this Texas A&M team coming into this, I see Notre Dame. It's Notre Dame, and as Greg mentioned, it's Notre Dame with a bit more advanced passing game. Kellen Mond, he's Greg, you're saying he's not as twitchy, not as good a runner as Derek King, but who he reminds me of is Ian Book. He's a lot like Ian Book. Now, Book, I think, is a better player than Mond. Mond is a little bit more hot and cold. And when you get good Kellen Mond out there, they're really good. But, there are times where he runs a little cold and he'll miss some throws and, do some things that sometimes just, but that's the thing is he's that kind of Ian Book kind of quarterback where, you think you got him in the backfield and then he'll just kind of slip and slide and then take off for 8-9 yards and first down. And there you go. And then the next play, slip out a little bit and throw it on the run to a tight end for another 15 yards. And before long, you're pulling your hair out because that guy's made some second level plays that weren't drawn the way they were drawn up. And you add to that he's playing, Fisher. One thing about Jimbo Fisher, and this is one of those things that for a long time, I mean, Fisher had Jamarcus Russell went number 1. Christian Ponder went in the first round. EJ Manuel went in the first round. Then Jameis Winston went number 1. And, for a long time, a lot of NFL scouts were basically, they loved Fisher's quarterbacks because they knew when they got him on the board that those guys were schooled in all of these NFL passing concepts, could run a full offense. They understood protections. These guys are ready to play in the NFL. What they didn't really get, and this is something that, when I was covering Fisher on the Florida State side of things, this is one of the things that I tried to explain to people then, is a lot of these pro scouts didn't seem to understand the degree to which Fisher's offense is the way he calls his offense and the way that he designs his offense for each quarterback, his offense is so quarterback friendly that he's going to make the quarterback look as good as possible. So what you're seeing from a quarterback in a Fisher offense, you're not going to get better than that in the NFL generally, because that guy's maxed. His potential is going to get maxed in that offense. So you're taking a guy like Mond and then you're maxing him in what they ask him to do. And so what they're asking him to do is a lot of the Notre Dame stuff, the same stuff that Ian Book was asked to do all year for Notre Dame. And that is hand the football off to a pair of really good running backs behind a big and experienced and physical and technically sound offensive line with one of the best tight ends in the country and Jalen Weidermeyer. And then basically roll off of that with some play action to, again, Weidermeyer right up the seam has given teams fits, and then doing some basic possession type passing with periodically they'll throw that post route over the top when you're stepping forward. When you go to quarters, they're going to take it. It's an alert and bam, all of a sudden they've got a deep throw. That's just what they do. It's just real simple. And it all starts for them with Isaiah Spiller and Aeneas Smith. If those guys, they're 2 running backs, and especially Spiller, if Spiller is able to get his yardage, if he's able to have any success in the running game, you're not stopping them. Just because everything else sort of works from that off of their play action passing game. And that's what they are. They are Fisher has zigged where everybody else has zagged in terms of what he's done in personnel. He's decided to emphasize staying big and trying to run the football in more traditional ways, just like what Notre Dame has done. And then build off of that with the traditional play action downfield passing game. That's what you got. And so if you can't match up on the interior and you can't stop the run with the tailback, all the others, the entire offense is open to them. So it has to start there. And if you can't do that, if you can't limit that, then the rest of it doesn't matter. So I don't think the onus is on Asante here. I think the onus is on the interior defensive line and the ability to hold up on the edges as well, because they'll run those edges a lot. Spiller is a very, very fast running back, and they like to start him in, say, the A or B gap and let him cut to the C gap, and then he's off to the races. And so it's the front 4, starting from the defensive tackles out, that have to play well for Carolina to have a good shot to win this game.
Yeah, and Tommy, Jay Bateman talks quite a bit about it's not so much about yardage anymore. It's really about getting off the field. And the way you get off the field is either by forcing turnovers or creating negative plays. A&M has allowed 4 sacks in 9 games this year. That's not a strength of North Carolina anyway, defensively, but that right there is an indication that you may not be able to get 4 or 5 sacks to help you in those situations. So you're going to have to come up with negative plays some other way. And when you have a quarterback like Mond who can kind of get away and pick up something out of nothing, that makes it even more problematic.
looking at they call them the Maroon Goons, their offensive line. They also have allowed 3.78 tackles for loss per game. So if you're not getting a sack and you're not getting tackles for loss, you need to get something else going on. But that's fifth nationally. And they went, I was looking at this, they went 24 quarters and 201 pass attempts without giving up a sack in the SEC this year. Pretty impressive.
And what they do, I mean, you watch their games, and this is one of those things I actually kind of got frustrated with some of the commentators at times, listening to them break down A&M. A&M, the worst of this was if you watch the LSU game and you listen to what they're actually saying, they're talking in that game about, well, yeah, I know A&M beat Florida, but they're just not as impressive as Florida. I mean, look at this game. I mean, they haven't really put LSU away. And, they just haven't looked as impressive offensively as what you'd like. And, Florida's offense is really humming. And, Florida should be in contention for the playoff rather than this Texas A&M team over this Texas A&M team. And I'm sitting there listening to this going, okay, pardon me for this, but Texas A&M beat Florida at Florida, right? Number one. Number two, they're up 20-0 when you're talking about this against LSU. And then a week or two later, LSU goes and they beat Florida as well, right?
Yep.
But here's what it was. And I was listening to, and I was trying to figure out, like, what is he talking about? What it is A&M's offense isn't exciting to watch as a rule. They go 5 yards. 6 yards, 4 yards, 3 yards, and now they're 3rd and 2. And guess what? They live in 3rd and 2. And then they get the 3rd down. And it's not fun to watch that, whereas Florida was putting up big play after big play all the time. But the thing that this A&M team has been able to do has been to live in good leverage situations, to not give up negative plays, to constantly play ahead of the sticks, and as a result, be really, really good on 3rd down. They're number 2 in the nation on 3rd down. 56.6%, 0.67% of the time, they're getting 3rd down conversions. And the reason for that is they live in 3rd and short. So they're very efficient as an offense. They're just not exciting because they don't have a bunch of playmakers. Spiller and their 2 tailbacks are really their only playmakers as far as big play guys. But because they just don't make a ton of mistakes and they don't wind up giving up negative plays and they play ahead of the sticks. By the way, Alabama is the only team ahead of them that's at 59% conversion, which is absurd. But it's the lack of excitement. So they don't look as good. They're not pretty, but they're not the team that you want to meet in the back alley because they will brawl you right into the wall. And that's what they do. And so, and unfortunately that sort of matches up badly with North Carolina's defense, because North Carolina's defense would rather you be a high flying team that's going to try to challenge a healthier secondary right now than a team that is going to try to challenge what's still a work in progress up front.
Very good points. Only mistake you made is they beat Florida in Texas Station.
You're right. Yeah, at College Station.
College Station.
It was LSU that beat Florida at Florida.
Yeah, man, that's led to Mullen whining about crowds and then immediately getting his program shut down for a little bit because of COVID. Anyway,
totally forgotten about that. That's good, and I should know this. And knowing I keep an eye to eye on Florida a little bit.
An eye to the ground. There you go. Greg, so it sounds like this is a shootout if Carolina's going to be in it. The question is, Phil Longo struggled against Notre Dame's defense. Phil Longo and his team struggled. Well, Mike Elko and Lay for Notre Dame are best of buds. So I can imagine we'll see almost the exact same game plan.
They run the same system.
The only deal is I don't know if they have and I can't pronounce his name, number 6 and number 9 for Notre Dame. So what's the approach here, Greg, for Longo?
Well, I think this is one where you've got to figure out a way to establish a run game. North Carolina has allowed 30 sacks. We've talked all year long about the issue for this offensive line, and it's gotten better as the season went along. But the problem has been on obvious passing downs and pass block. And so when you kind of combine all those things, what Notre Dame did so well is they took away the run and get North Carolina behind the chains, and then they just come after Sam Howell. And they were willing to say, we're going to get to Howell and make him throw it before any of those vertical options come up and down the field. And so not only do you not have Diami, who's your primary vertical threat, that's a big loss for sure. But I think you can mitigate that a good bit with some of the other guys. I mean, Chaffee Brown may be faster than his brother. It hurts not having Bo Corrales, but I think you got enough options there where you can be successful in the passing game. Problem is going to be you've got to manufacture a run game somehow. And British Brooks has looked good at times, but he doesn't play a lot for a reason. And Josh Henderson's kind of the same way. And so I think those guys don't have to have great games by any stretch, but you have to keep A&M honest. And when you look at where North Carolina's had so much success, Sam Howell ranks 5th nationally in the percentage of dropbacks that are play action. And that's for a reason. And because North Carolina's run game has been so successful, that really helps to kind of keep defenses honest. And I think a lot of people say, Sam's is going to have to throw it 80% of the time. North Carolina's not winning the game if they do that. And that's not what Phil Longo wants to do anyway. So they have to figure out a way. And even if you have to throw some screen passes, which I know is not Longo's key thing, but you've got to figure out how to capitalize on that short passing game, which sometimes equates to part of the run game, to get some plays for these guys. I mean, you may see some sweeps with Daz Newsome, a lot of different things like that to generate some rushing attack. Because if you don't, they're just going to pin their ears back and come after Sam Howell, and that's going to be a long afternoon. I think if you're able to do that and give him some time to throw, he can make plays down the field. We know he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and has proven that time and time again. But if you don't have a run game to balance out the offense, that's really going to be a wing and a prayer.
This is one of those we'll look back as what-if games. Just looking at Texas A&M's defense, Jason, they allowed 92 yards of rushing a game, second in the conference, their conference. They've given up, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, only 25 carries of more than 10 yards. That's second in the conference behind Georgia. I mean, I said it off the air, and I'll say it again, and maybe I'm crazy, but Carter and Javonte Williams make a huge difference for this offense. But I don't know if that would be the winning difference for Carolina. Greg mentioned Sam Howell throwing it 80% of the time, not winning. I'm not so sure that might not give Carolina the biggest chance and use Walston and Daz Newsome a ton. I can envision a game plan that has Daz Newsome with 200-plus yards and 10 to 15 catches. I don't envision a run game rushing for 200 yards, whether Carter or Javonte were out there or not. I don't know. Help me understand that those two opt-outs are not the death knell for North Carolina's offense.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing here. I mean, I wouldn't say they're the death knell because I think there's good talent on the roster at running back behind him. I do. I think those guys can play. I think honestly this would have been a tough game offensively, even with Carter and Williams. Truth is, because I think that this Texas A&M team is pretty comparable defensively to the Notre Dame team that they had trouble with on offense already. I mean, you look at the SP Plus rankings of the two, and they're not that far apart. Notre Dame, 9th in the country defensively, and A&M 20th. And when you start looking at what they bring to the table defensively, there's a lot of similarities in terms of where their weaknesses have been and what they've been able to do. And the first thing that is in common about both of them is both teams are really good at stopping the run. And if you look at that box score between North Carolina and Notre Dame to begin with, going back to the November game, North Carolina had 30 carries for 87 yards. and that's with Carter and Javonte Williams.
Yep.
So, that's the what if is okay. Would those guys be able to find those creases and those seams against a team that's of comparable quality up front and at linebacker and so on this time? Maybe. We don't know. I mean, that's the what if. But I think it'd be tough sledding either way, because A&M is good, experienced, and deep on the defensive line. They've got a quality guy who's going to play in the NFL for a couple of years at the Mike backer. They're good up front. They don't give up a ton of yards. I mean, you look at them on the season, and it's interesting looking at what they've done in the run defense side. They only gave up 109 rushing yards to Alabama.
Whew, that's strong.
Okay, so there have been two teams that have been able to run the football against them. One is Arkansas, with the Bryles offense that they're running there, which is pretty different from what North Carolina is doing. But you can steal some of the stuff that they did, for sure. And that's something that if I'm Mack Brown, if I'm Phil Longo, I'm looking very closely at that Arkansas game, and I'm looking very closely at the Auburn game, because Auburn put up 196 yards on them. And that those are the two games where they gave up rushing yards. 222 to Arkansas, 5.29 yards per carry, and 196 on 6.5 yards per carry against Auburn. The thing is, they won both of those games. But those are the games that I'm looking at to try to find, okay, is there something that they did, especially since both those teams like to go fast, they like to run out of the spread. Is there something that they did that we can latch on to with our personnel to see if we can get a few plays? But the big thing is they've given up some passing yardage on the year. And that's really, if they've got a soft spot on the defense, they're giving up some passing plays. And if you watch their games, they've given up some plays where teams have gotten behind them. Their secondary is really their weak spot. So the trick is that you don't want to get into, and I think Greg's right, you can't throw 80% of the time and expect to win this game. But you can throw, say, 65, maybe even 70% of the time. You can go 65% of the time, and you got to pick your spots to take some shots. This is a game where Joffrey Brown, where some of those guys that can really run, you've got to get them isolated on the right guy and let them go. And I think there are some situations where you're going to be able to run by those guys. And again, very similar to Notre Dame early on, get a post route, get a little stutter go in early going and get an early lead based on running by them is one of your best bets in this game. And I think that's something that early on they're going to have to come in and they're going to have to decide which guy they feel like they can get the best matchup on and see if Howell can get a couple deep shots that change the game early on. And that's really your best bet if you're North Carolina. I think you're coming into this feeling like if we can get a couple big plays in the passing game early, get a good start, and put them in a position where, they're going to have to be coming from behind. Now, they're not going to lose patience. They are what they are offensively. They're going to keep pounding the ball. But that allows the defense and also your own offense to play with a different kind of game leverage for the rest of the game than if you come out and you try to run the football, you go a couple 3-and-outs early on, and you all of a sudden are down, 10-0, in the middle of the second quarter, and you're playing their kind of game. So I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to find a couple of those mismatches for some play action shots where you feel like your guy can run away from them, because I think they've got some weakness in the back seven, or it's the back four that you can run by a couple of their guys.
And they do expect to get Miles Jones back, who was their top cornerback. He was out.
That does hurt.
He was out against Tennessee.
Yeah, but it looks like they give up 280 passing, and they've given up some touchdowns in the passing game. I think Howell has to have a huge game. But the one thing, Greg, and I want to get to the prediction portion, the one thing, and this goes back to the running backs and missing Carter and Williams, is what is the most important thing that Henderson or Brooks or Elijah Green do in this game? Is it gain yards? Is it secure the football, protect the football? Is it blitz pick up? Is it catch the ball out of the backfield? I mean, what are you looking for from these guys for Carolina's offense to have some success?
Yeah, I think Jason's exactly right in that Mack Brown has a good eye for talent. And so it's not a situation where you have two really good running backs in Carter and Williams and there's nobody left in the cupboard. With the ball in their hands, they know what to do. And the little bit that we've seen them, they can run the ball. But what you have to do at this level and in this offense, to your point, you got to take care of the football. All right, Carter and Williams, I mean, how many fumbles have they lost this year?
Zip.
And then there's the pass blocking aspect. And I know a lot of people are sitting there saying, well, the way that you stop A&M's pass rush is you max protect. And you keep Walston at home and you keep the running back at home. Okay, as long as the running back knows exactly what he's supposed to do. And that's one of the things with Elijah Green, with him not having experience in pass protection. It doesn't sound like he's going to play a whole lot. He may be the third option. And so they're really that's where it's important. And if we come out of this game and we're talking about one of those running backs coughing up the ball, or you getting blown up trying to block for Sam, that's where the problems are. I mean, if they get the ball and are able to run and have some success, that's good. But that's not the key part for them. I think as long as there's some holes there, they'll be able to pick up some yardage, but they can't hurt the team, and that's the key part for those guys.
And they run some exotic blitzes, and this is now, I think, year 3 under Elko there, and they really understand how to run some of the stuff that he really likes to get pressure. They've got some like AA type blitzes where you're bringing a backer into the A gap, and then you actually have a second backer who will delay just slightly, or a safety. A lot of times it'll be a backer that hits the A gap. He has to get picked up, and then they'll have a safety, say, come down from the boundary side and hit the same A gap. And you have to really understand how to pick that blitz up, or that guy's coming free. And it's designed to hit free. And they've had success with that kind of thing all year. And so that's going to be a big part. The other thing also that I think is really important for these young backs that I think might be the biggest drop-off is the impact of Carter and Williams as pass catchers. Because they were really, really good in the passing game as receivers this year. And I mean, that was a big part of North Carolina's attack in giving Sam Howell easy outlets to backs who just got free yards over and over and over again, because those guys didn't drop balls and they got open. They were consistently in the right spot. They were not covered by – those guys didn't get covered by a linebacker all year.
50 catches between the two of them.
Yeah, and what, like 3 drops?
Probably.
Yeah. I mean, so you're looking at a level of success out of the backfield with those players that I think that's something you can't overlook as well. And that's something that the young backs are going to have to do in Longo's offense. And one of the best things that they can do to deal with some of those blitz looks is to have some outlets to the backs. Don't involve the back in pass protection. Just release him. And if the backer comes, get it out there. These sorts of things, those are some of the things that you can do to help your young backs sometimes. And I expect to see a little bit of that from Longo and the offense, is trying to use them in the passing game. But again, they're inexperienced. They don't have a ton of experience running routes and making sure they're making the right read in the passing game there. So those are some of the little things that they're going to have to get right to be able to be as successful on the offensive side as they were with the other two, with the two that have been elite all year. I'm looking at it here, by the way, 4 total drops between Williams and Carter on the season, 50 catches and 4 drops.
Pretty good.
Yikes.
That's pretty good. So let's do the predictions. Jason, since you're on it, let's go with you first. Predict it. What happens on Saturday night?
Well, unfortunately, I think the opt-outs really hurt the chance to make this as competitive a game as it should be. Another opt-out we haven't really talked about is De'Ami Brown. I mean, I think that is a major factor in this game, because you think about all the big games that Carolina has played the last 2 years, where how many of them has Brown had at least one, if not 2 or 3, deep routes that have changed those games.
Yeah, all of them.
He's had 14 pass plays of 25 yards or more this season.
And if you look at who those plays are against, he had one early against and when those plays are. So for Javonte Brown, it's not just about the fact that he has those plays. It's against whom and when. You look at that early Miami game, setting the tone in that game. He ran right by Miami's corner for a 50-yarder early in that game that completely set the tone for that game. And saying, okay, you better be able to cover this guy. You better have that guy over the top, which means we're going to be able to run right up that seam.
Clemson last year.
Miami last year.
Yeah.
Clemson last year.
Over and over.
Yeah, exactly. Over and over and over again. And against guys that are going to be playing in the NFL, or some guy, the guy he ran right by against Clemson last year is playing in the NFL right now, A.J. Terrell.
Yep. So
that's a big loss too, and that's one that we didn't talk about really up to now. And so I think the opt-outs really hurt in this game. And the biggest problem, I think, is I see this as kind of a repeat of the Notre Dame game, only North Carolina's playing shorthanded comparatively. And I think A&M might not be quite as good as that Notre Dame team, but they're awfully close. And so ultimately, I think this game winds up being sort of a mirror image of that. I'm going to go with Texas A&M 38, North Carolina 13.
Greg.
Yeah, when you think about Sam Howell not having Diami and needing to carry the team, which he's done a lot, but how many times, has he had monster games in North Carolina? Really have to kind of struggle to be in the game. When you take away the run game. Look at what Virginia did. Sam set all kinds of records in that game, and because Virginia shut down the run game, it wasn't enough. And you add to that the fact that A&M has allowed 11 pass plays of 30 yards or more. I think North Carolina is going to have to hit on some big plays to have a chance in this game. I don't know how that's really going to happen. And I think for North Carolina to win, they're going to have to win the turnover battle. And that's something that they just have not done all season long. And so those are a couple of things that would give North Carolina an opportunity. But I agree with Jason. I think it's very similar to what happened against Notre Dame. I do think Carolina will have a little bit more success. I think they'll learn from that second half against Notre Dame when they were completely shut down offensively. But I've got A&M winning this one 35-21.
And actually, I was thinking while you were doing that, I'm going to amend my North Carolina score. I do think 13 is too low, so I'm going to go 38-24 because I think you're right. I was thinking through a couple of the big plays that Texas A&M has given up. I think they'll get a couple of them, so I'm going to go with that.
Yep, they got to steal a couple touchdowns and win the turnover battle. You win the turnover battle, then it's I'm not prepared to make a pick yet. I have to wait till I get down to Miami to see if my mood changes. I tend to agree with you guys at the moment. That could change once South Beach comes into view. But it's always been fun. Look, we've had a lot of fun doing these game plan podcasts over the past years, but especially this year. Like you said, Jason, it's always more fun when they win. And it's been so
much more fun.
It's been a pretty special year in that regard. Carolina in the Orange Bowl Saturday night, 8:00. Texas A&M 5-13. Greg Barnes will be down there covering it. I'll be down there watching it. Jason Staples will be chasing youngins. Guys, it's always been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you, Tommy.